Hello and welcome back to the Roker Rapport Extra podcast. This is the Sheffield United preview. We're doing it a little bit earlier than usual. Christmas kind of gets in the way of a lot of stuff. Essentially, we haven't played Birmingham yet, so we've got on today our first ever verified guest, technically, James Shield from the Sheffield Star, or also the Star, but apparently called the Sheffield Star. How are you doing, James? Are you well?
I'm fine, absolutely fine. And you?
Yeah, not doing too bad. Christmas coming up. How's things at Sheffield United this season?
It's been very, very interesting. Certainly up until about a month ago. I mean, it was going far better than anybody could have expected. I think the manager and the players, I'm sure, will tell you they expected to be challenging for promotion. I'm not sure whether I quite believe them. I certainly didn't expect them to be climbing to the top of the table, which they did a month back. Things have tailed off a little bit, as you'll know, over the past few weeks. They're heading into the next game without a win in 5, which is the worst run actually of Chris Wilder's reign at Bramall Lane. But other than that, I think when you look at the budgets, when you look at some of the financial constraints that they've got at Bramall Lane, you've got to still say it's been a remarkable season so far.
Because I was looking at the table, and I, in a really weird way, I was actually quite surprised that you were only 6th off top, because being at the opposite end of the table, I haven't really looked, but you were 2nd off top at one point, I think. Is that right?
Well, that's right. Well, after they beat Burton Albion last month, they actually went to the top of the table. They'd been involved in a sort of a little duel, really, with Wolverhampton Wanderers. Now, of course, they've slipped way back in terms of points now, and I think any hope of challenging for the top of the table or for first place has long gone. But you never know. And to be honest, it's a team that has sort of defied expectations. I mean, even last season when they were promoted out of League One, that probably sounds a little bit strange. You would have expected Sheffield United to get promoted out of League One, but having spent as long as they did in that division, which is one of the reasons why I would suggest Sunderland want to be very, very careful about dropping into the third tier, because it really is like quicksand. There's causes all sorts of problems both on and off the pitch. But to win the division like they did, with 100 points. A ridiculous amount of goals. I think at one point they'd scored more goals than any of the leading clubs in Europe. That you've got to say that defied expectations. I think the one thing they will be hoping is that the last really poor run that they had under Chris Wilder was actually at the very beginning of that season, where they were bottom of the table and didn't actually win any of their first 4 games. So if it inspires that type of run again, then who knows where they might end up. But I'll tell you what, as well, joking aside, for the benefit of this match, it also goes to show Sunderland support is just what is possible. Yeah,
very much so. And I think almost, and I've said this a few times on the podcast over the past few weeks, there was almost an ignorance from my side of teams in the league below us, because we've been that long in the Premiership. And I remember when Sheffield United came up, I seen that as a chance to kind of get back into it. And Sheffield United, I think most people would agree, are probably one of, if not the best side we've seen at the stadium this season. And generally looked like you had 11 players playing for a manager. And it was funny, because in the summer we were linked sort of ever so slightly to Chris Wilder before we got Grayson, and a lot of people looked at Wilder and thought, well, yeah, he's a really good choice, but I don't believe he's really done much before Sheffield United. But he's a big Blades fan, isn't he?
He is, yeah. I mean, he'd had a sort of a pretty successful career before he arrived at Bramall Lane, but albeit not one that would sort of really feature on the radar unless you supported Halifax Town, sort of Oxford United or Northampton Town. And I don't mean that sort of flippantly or with any disrespect, but they're not sort of clubs where their achievements really sort of resonate with the wider public. But yeah, you're right. I think this is one of the reasons why what's happened at Bramall Lane this season is such a great sort of story. Right, it's like a great fairy tale, because you've got the sort of the fan turned former player turned manager who's in charge of the football club, and what they're doing this season, and to a degree, this also held true last season as well. But they're doing it in a sort of a quaintly old-fashioned way. There's something quite sort of romantic about it, because they're a team that, when you look at the budget, I think by my sort of back of a fag packet maths, they should be in 19th place in the Championship. And I think my sort of calculations I've had it confirmed are pretty accurate for once on that. My bank manager might be quite surprised to hear that, but but they're doing it by bringing players up largely from the lower leagues, or by signing players who, for one reason or another, their sort of potential hasn't really been fulfilled in their careers.
Yeah,
and just turning them into a really strong unit, as you said, and I think as you saw at the Stadium of Light, and just improving the players that they've got. They've done remarkably well with some of the more longer serving players who Chris Wilder and his assistant Alan Neil inherited from the former manager Nigel Adkins and Nigel Clough before him.
Yeah,
and it's almost sort of quite, I don't know, I'm going to sound sort of very arty-farty here, but it's almost sort of quite organic, isn't it? And it's everything, I think, that if a football fan could sort of, plot a course for their club and say, listen, if we can get success, how would you like to do it? It's almost in the way that Sheffield United are doing it now. And the other great thing, where I think they, in fairness, they have won a lot of friends, possibly not on the blue and white half of the city down here in Sheffield, but where they have won a lot of friends, I think, is because they've come up into the division and they've had a real go. They've gone to the Stadium of Light, which is, it's a terrific ground. And, obviously you were in the Premier League not so long ago, and they've had a go. They've done that against all of the big clubs that they've played so far. They've been really attack minded. It's the type of thing that fans really buy into, and I think you'll see that when you come to Bramall Lane, regardless of what the result in the meantime will be. You'll see the crowd. There's a real connection there between the team and the terraces, and that's something I think that a lot of football clubs, dare I say it, with an awful lot more money, would spend a fortune to have.
Yeah, very much. And it's funny, we've only just started sort of recently getting that back with Coleman, and I don't want to hedge my bets too much because obviously we're talking before a home game that we have against the bottom club, and you never know how that's going to go. But assuming that goes well, Coleman has instilled something back into the club where there is a connection between fans and players, and it was incredibly fractured from our side, say a month and a half, 2 months ago, 5 weeks or so, incredibly fractured between the players such as Gibson, Cattermole, and Cattermole maybe still so, but like people like Darren Gibson have sort of had a bit of a resurgence under him. The team as a whole, if I'm honest, have had a resurgence under Coleman. And it just goes to show that if you don't have that connection, or what can happen. And when Grayson was here, it was really fractured. It was almost like you were pulled apart. We were at the opposite ends of the spectrum, and not just us, the managers, the team, but also the boardroom. And to an extent, we still are. But when you watch teams like Sheffield United, we really picked that up when we watch Sheffield United. Because if you look through your team, as you were saying before, I've just looked at the players who've played the most minutes sort of at the club. And obviously you've got like the stalwarts like Billy Sharp who've been there a while, but you've got the likes of Ender Stevens, who didn't do too much at Aston Villa, Chris Basham, obviously ex-Bolton and Blackpool, John Fleck, ex-Coventry. You've got Cameron Carter-Vickers on loan from Tottenham. It's not like you have a bunch of players that you could say are, higher end championship players yet. As a unit, obviously you're performing at that level that teams who spend a lot of money, or maybe the size of us, would expect. You're in a position we would maybe not expect to be, but hope to be, with the fact we've just been relegated. Yet because we were fractured, it's only took till now before we come back, where Sheffield United seem like a very cohesive unit, both on and off the pitch.
Do you know what? You're absolutely right. And in a sense, obviously, it'll be a shame if it gets totally repaired before you arrive at Bramall Lane. I'm sure Sheffield United supporters, and the team and the players will say that. But it's good to hear that that's changing at Sunderland, because I can remember when it was one of the games that I always used to enjoy covering matches at Sunderland, and it was one of the games that I was actually looking forward to in the when Sheffield United were promoted out of League One and into the Championship. So there was a little bit of them. Don't take this the wrong way. I was sort of quite pleased that you were relegated, really, because I was looking forward to going to the Stadium of Light again. I just love driving into a town, into a city where you see sort of pictures of former players on the side of houses, and you feel it's a real sort of footballing town, a footballing city. And if you're a football fan, you can't help but love that, and you can't buy having that connection between the team and the supporters. It's changed very, very starkly here, because under Nigel Adkins, before Chris came in, it was anything but. It was something that you would probably recognise from the start of the season up there on Wearside, and where there was a group of fans, a large majority of fans, I would say. And this isn't a dig at supporters, because fans pay an awful lot of money to come and watch their teams play these days, and they've got every right to let their sort of feelings be known. And they were just waiting to have a go at the team, because quite honestly, they'd had a gutful of what they'd seen served up. I think I described it in the paper as that it was a club that had just sleepwalked through an entire season. But if you've got that connection, and it helps you through the tough times as well. I mean, Sheffield United have had difficult periods in games this season. They're going through a tough period at the moment in terms of results. But they still had, I think it was over 4,000 supporters up at Preston North End last weekend, and they stayed behind the team, even though it was, it could hardly be described as a vintage performance, but they stayed behind them right until the end. So to have that connection, you know what? I think that's worth sort of 10, 20 million pounds in the transfer market. And I think the other thing that you touched on there, which is very, very true about Sheffield United at the moment, and I'm sure it's something, having spoken to David Brooks, actually, who's a very, very talented young player who's on the books at Bramall Lane at the moment, who was involved in the Wales squad recently. So of course he's got to know Chris Coleman quite well, and I remember having a chat with him about how Chris Coleman likes to try and work, and about the atmosphere that he created sort of behind the scenes in the Wales camp. So I know that that's something he'll be looking to do at the Stadium of Light. The great thing about Sheffield United is, at the moment, they are a team in the true sense of the word. And as you said, there's no sort of great stars there. There's no wonderful sort of stellar names or big money players. I think I sound like I'm rubbing it in now, but the guy who scored the goals up at your place, of course, Clayton Donaldson, I think he was signed for less than one of your players, I think, so I'm led to believe, earns in a week. But they're a team in the true sense of the word. And they've got that through, what I said earlier about there's something sort of quaintly old-fashioned and quite romantic about the way Sheffield United go about things under Chris Wilder. And I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that they're out on the lash, as it were, 5 nights a week, because they're not, and they do embrace the scientific side of the game. They do work very, very hard on the training ground. They do an awful lot of analysis. They look at diet, all of the things that football managers and football coaches get very, very involved in these days. But the one thing they also do is make sure that the players enjoy themselves, and they don't forget some of the sort of the old, longer standing ideas that, sometimes it is good to go out for a night together. It is good to have the odd pint together. And I think some of the reasons why Chris always bristles when I sort of put to him that Chris Wilder, that these ideas are old fashioned, and he doesn't like the word. And I get why, but I mean it as something positive, because the reason these ideas are old-fashioned is because they've been around for a long time and they've stood the test of time. And the reason they've stood the test of time is because they're damn good ideas. And you've got a team there that fights for each other. I think the other thing as well, that possibly even more so than the way that the new players are brought into that, is the way that you've seen the methods that they're employing there have actually transformed some of the longer serving players. I mean, Paul Coates, who unfortunately is going to miss the rest of the season now with a pretty terrible leg injury. But, last season and at the start of this season, he was in absolutely phenomenal form. Chris Basham, who, someone who knows your part of the world very well. I mean, he's from Hebburn. His family are season ticket holders at the Stadium of Light, and Chris will make no bones about it. He's a big Sunderland fan as well. He didn't have a terrible start or a terrible first few years at Sheffield United, but I wouldn't say it was spectacular either. But now he's a real crowd favourite with the supporters, because you're seeing the talent now that once made him a Premier League footballer with Bolton Wanderers. And I think it's possibly with those longer serving players that you're actually seeing the benefit of this sort of mix between the old fashioned and the very modern and sort of scientific.
It's funny you should mention about going out and the old fashioned methods. It's if you remember Sunderland Sheffield United games, I'm 31, so when it comes to like big games that I remember the playoff semi-finals, and that was our best team in my memory. And a lot of that was a team who, and I've interviewed a few players, that Alex Ray, for example, was one, and Kevin Ball, people like that over time. And they always talk about the fact that people on the pitch they'd almost like die for each other because they were mates. And it wasn't that they were unfit. They were fit as lops. I mean, Kevin Phillips is one of the best strikers in the past 20, 30 years, in my opinion, in the top league. But they'd all fight for each other, and it was a team. You look at the people who were in our team at that point, you got Nicky Summerby, Alan Johnson, Kevin Ball, Alex Ray, and they all went on to have good careers, especially Kevin Phillips. But at the same time, when they were all signed by the club, they were very much, Niall Quinn aside, possibly, because he had a good career at Man City. But you go from back to front, and you had Sorensen, who was a young Danish goalkeeper, Chris Macon, who was right back at Oldham. You had Mickey Gray, who was an old school sort of player for us, came through our youth system. People like Andy Melville, another old boy, Paul Butler from Bury. And people forget that kind of fact that so a lot of that team, when it was signed, was pretty much not superstars or not big names at the point, and having a fantastic career after that and going on to not bigger clubs, other clubs just as big as Sunderland. And that was all built on team spirit and the fact that they wanted to fight for each other. And Peter Reid, I imagine, is still a very old-fashioned manager if he ever came back. And whether he'd succeed in the same way, I don't know. But Chris Wilder does kind of, from an outside perspective, remind me a little bit of Peter Reid and what he brought to the club.
I think you're right, because I think the one thing that Chris himself, I mean, he had a decent career, but he didn't have a sort of spectacular career. And I think that's something that he's brought into management, is that, he does demand a lot of his players because he had to push himself as a footballer. So, he does demand hard work. He does demand sort of absolute dedication to the football club. And, he's not somebody who would take a player wanting to leave Sheffield United very, very lightly. I think unless there's, sort of a multi-million pound contract there on the table, I think he'd find it quite difficult to fathom why somebody would want to leave. And that, that comes from his background as someone who's from Sheffield, someone who grew up supporting the club, and as someone who played for the club as well. But you're absolutely right. I think the one thing that managers like Chris and before him Peter Reid get is that, for all of the analysis, for all of the sort of, the fancy methods that you can bring in and techniques that you can use and should employ, you've also got to enjoy yourself. I'll give you a good example of that. And I'm not sort of kicking the guy or as I sort of said, being disrespectful about him. But when you used to go up to the training ground for the pre-match press conferences, under that season, under Nigel Adkins, you could hear a penny drop. And you would go up there, and they've got the pool table there, they've got the darts board, they've got everything that sort of you would expect to see in a football club's canteen. But the one thing that they didn't have was any life, and it was as dead as a dodo. And it was almost it would suck the life out of you, even though obviously, those of us in the media, we're not playing. But just to walk into an atmosphere like that, you actually walked out of it feeling quite depressed yourself. And within a couple of weeks, or a couple of days, sorry, I should say, of Chris coming back in, you heard players laughing, you heard players joking. You now see players coming into training early so they can sort of have a knockabout on the pool table or just sit down and have breakfast with each other and enjoy each other's company. And I think what managers like that get is, as I said, you have to enjoy yourself. It's the same as any job, same as your job, same as my job. If you're not enjoying yourself, you're not really going to perform. And as much as we like to knock footballers at times, and some of the money that they earn even at this level, and even poorly players at this level, I'm guessing you and I wouldn't mind being a penny behind them,
no,
or even a pound
not at all.
behind them. Yeah. But to be fair, they do work hard to become professionals, and if they go through all and make the sacrifices that they do when they're youngsters, and then you get to become a professional footballer and you can't enjoy it, I always think, what's the point? Because it's almost like, isn't it, enjoyment now has become a dirty word in football. It's got to be very, very sort of sterile. It's got to be very serious. Ultimately, for all of the money that flushes through the game now, this is the entertainment business. It's about being enjoyed. It's about, clubs have to look after the balance sheet, and players have got to behave themselves and and know what to eat now and know when to go out and know when not to go out. But ultimately, for everybody involved in this, it's about enjoyment, it's about entertainment, and, you know, buying into that whole sort of, I don't want to sound like Brendan Rodgers, but that whole sort of philosophy of doing things like that. And that is what good managers, I think, recognise.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, because I think, you know, a lot of the time when, I mean, we've obviously had a lot of turmoil in our management. We've had Grayson, Moyes and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of people were saying it doesn't matter who you bring in because these players are this and that and the other. And a lot of people will say football as a whole, you know, if the team's doing poorly, how do you motivate people like Lamine Kone? How do you motivate people like Darren Gibson? Because, you know, they're millionaires. They've got no real connection to the club. They want to leave, or they're not interested, or whatever the reason may be. And I think a lot of that, getting them to play, is kind of what you've mentioned. It's, you know, if you're enjoying your job, you almost put that effort in without actually noticing. Like I work in a complaints role. You work obviously as a writer. If you know, if you're enjoying what you're writing, you don't notice that you're working. If I'm enjoying a conversation with a customer, and I work in a call center based, and if I speak to a customer that I like, I don't notice that I'm working. I almost forget that I'm getting paid. I forget what I'm doing. I'm having fun. And if I connect well with my manager, which thankfully I do, I'll do a lot more for him, because I want that atmosphere more and more and more. And I just want it to keep happening all the time, and always feel like I can speak to my manager and my colleagues and my co-workers. And footballers are no different to that. They're still human beings at the end of the day. And I think when you can come into a club like Sunderland and you've got someone with the demeanour of David Moyes, and I hate David Moyes, I'll say that till kingdom come. I can never imagine enjoying the football club when he was in there. It was just so dour, and his demeanour was just so bad. And then Chris Coleman coming in, and we're only talking 5 weeks, but he's talked a lot of sense. He's talked a lot of realism. He's been very, very straightforward, but he seems to understand that what is missing is an enjoyment. And he said the other week, he said in a press conference, I know what this football club's missing, and I think I can bring it back. He never alluded to what it was, but I think a lot of it is almost like the heart and the soul and the enjoyment of that has been missing from something for a while. And it's only took 3 clean sheets and 2 wins in 5 for him to start bringing that back. And that's because the players seem to be enjoying the atmosphere of the manager, because things are a little bit more positive. The fan base is a little bit more positive. It's a really great place to play at Sunderland. People say it's a difficult job. It's an impossible task. It's not if you get it right. And it's such an easy place to get it right. And I think a lot of that is enjoyment, as you were saying before.
I'll tell you what, there's just a couple of things there that you touched on that I wholeheartedly agree with. I mean, one of the similarities, I think, between, well, I mean, you can make a couple, but between Sheffield United and Sunderland, other than the fact that both of them have been through some pretty tough times of late, they're both excellently supported football clubs. They're both football clubs as well, who I think have got a very, very loyal support. I mean, I can certainly speak for down here through some really difficult times and through 6 seasons in League One. You know, that crowd stuck, in terms of numbers through the gate, that crowd stayed pretty solid. And now, you know, it's obviously gone up slightly, as you would expect. But they've always been, certainly in, you know, during my time in South Yorkshire, they've always been a really, really well-supported football club. So if, like Sheffield United, and if, like Sunderland, you've got a fan base like that, you've got a crowd like that, it absolutely beggars belief, you're right, as to why some managers would not see that as something that they've got to ignite. Yeah. And, you know, it's the old phrase, isn't it? The 12th man. I hate it when you go to Reading. This is my pet hate. It's not David Moyes. But when you go to Reading and you see the team sheet there, and when you go to the Majeski Stadium, I know they still do it now, and you'll see it on the bottom, number 12, Reading fans. And I always cringe when I see that. But, you know, it's actually, it can be a 12th man. I don't want to see it on a team sheet, but I'm quite happy to talk about it. And I just do not understand for the life of me why some managers, and it seems as if Chris Coleman gets this, and Chris Wilder certainly gets this, wouldn't want to use that as something positive. Another thing that you said there about why would players like Kone, you know, how do you get them to buy into a football club? I think you get them to buy into it by enjoying being there. Because, you know, for example, Chris Basham, who we spoke about earlier, he's from the Northeast. You know, he's played for Bolton, he's played for Blackpool before he came to Bramall Lane. He's not from Sheffield, as far as I'm aware, unless he's keeping something very quiet. He's got from Sheffield. John Fleck from Scotland, Paul Cootes from Scotland, Cameron Carter-Vickers from Essex, Billy Sharp obviously is from Sheffield, but Leon Clark, a player who's doing ridiculous things this season, he's from Wolverhampton. But all of these players have really bought into the football club. I mean, it's great when you speak to Chris Basham, that is, who's moved to the area. And the one thing that really comes across loud and clear, and I'm not his agent, he's just signed a new contract, so I'm not, I'm not on 10% of anything he gets, but it's great to hear him talk about Sheffield United and Bramall Lane, because you can see he's not only made a professional investment in the football club, he's made a really emotional investment in the football club as well. And I think that's just because he enjoys being there. And I think that's how you get footballers to actually buy in to a football club. The other thing, that enjoyment and having a manager who I think understands players have got to enjoy themselves, it also makes it an awful lot easier for the manager to actually, wield the big stick at times. And players will take that. Twice now in the last couple of weeks, once at Millwall, once at Preston. Chris Wilder's come out. He is a manager who pretty much tells it as it is. There's not a lot of PR. There's not a lot of spin from him. I say not a lot. There's absolutely none at all. And he's been very, very critical of his players. But behind the scenes, and when you do this job, there are players that you get to know. It's the same as any walk of life. You get on with some better than others. But there are some who, obviously, I'm not saying anything that will surprise anybody here, because it's what we do for a living, but who take you into their confidence and will speak to you privately and off the record. And the one thing that comes across loud and clear is every time Chris does that, which granted he hasn't had to do it very often, but the players actually take it and they accept it, because there's that bond there between the manager and his playing staff. And I think that bond, as I said, just comes from that enjoyment, comes from, having somebody who has got your back, who will allow you to have a good time and go out there and express yourself, but also demands an awful lot for you and wants an awful lot from the football club. So, yeah, I really do scratch my head at times, I think, when you see or hear managers who just incessantly talk about tactics and formations and shape and this, that and the other. Yes, it's all important. We all know that. But, you never hear them talk about enjoyment. I know it's a word I've used an awful lot on this podcast already, but it's just so important.
True, it's what we're all in it for: fans, writers, managers, players. I think that's why we're there. And if it's not enjoyable, which it hasn't been, you can say what you want about fans, and you can have the most loyalist fan on the planet. I mean, I live up in Scotland, and there was times last season where I didn't want to go. It felt like my duty, but if someone like myself can feel like that because I'm not enjoying it, then I'll go back to what you said before. What's the point? And thankfully it's coming back with Coleman. And it's funny, I wanted to ask you about it's because I was going to ask you about your downturn in form, but I'll be honest with you, it's been quite nice to hear that it doesn't seem to have knocked Sheffield United's confidence at all, because it's 4 and 5, fair enough, it's a lot, you're still 6th off top, and I know there's a lot to be positive about with that, but in a selfish way, I was kind of hoping you were going to tell me that you're all depressed, you feel like you might actually plummet down the table, we're going to hammer you, but I haven't got that, I'll be honest. I haven't picked that up from you.
I'll tell you what, I think it suddenly though has become possibly a much tougher game for Sheffield United than ordinarily you might have thought 4 or 5 weeks ago. I think there's absolutely no doubt about that.
Yes.
But no, there isn't, and I think another reason for that is because, Chris had a head start. Chris Wilder, this is, not Chris Basham. Chris Wilder did have a head start when he came into the football club, because I've actually known or first come across Chris, I should say, probably about 10 years ago. And one of the reasons was because he did, even though he was working away, he did used to come back to the area. And when I say he was a fan of the football club, you would actually see him, pop up at games fairly regularly when his schedule allowed. So, he is a proper fan. He's not somebody who just sort of, used it to make a nice line when he turned up for his appointment and his, his coronation as manager. He is a genuine supporter. Most of his friends are, or an awful lot of his friends are Sheffield United supporters. I'm led to believe there's a few Sheffield Wednesday ones in there as well, but he doesn't talk about them very often. But so he knew what was going on at the football club. He was walking into the situation. It was a very difficult situation, but very, very much with his eyes open. And that sort of attacking football, that really positive football that I was talking about, a while back. I think that's one of the things that's also helped keep the fans on board. I mean,
yeah,
he will get a lot more grace because he's a very popular figure, and because they know he's one of their own, as it were. But the other thing as well is that, really helps him build that is the fact, as I said, they're prepared to have a go, and it's entertaining. I mean, you go back certainly to the first couple, maybe to be entirely accurate, after the first season in League One, when they made a real good fist of it. They looked like they were going up. It couldn't have panned out worse. There was a lot going on off the pitch, as I'm sure you'll be aware of, and probably won't go into that now, else we'll be here all night. But but there was a lot going on, and they ended up being picked by Sheffield Wednesday to automatic promotion, and then losing the playoff semi-final or playoff final, on penalties. It seemed like about 119, 120. It was down to the goalkeepers, so that was a pretty terrible season, but as the way it panned out. But from that point on, I always got the impression that the fans weren't really with the team, and there wasn't that much to sing about. And they were, as you said, they were just sort of going through the motions, really. I mean, they had some great cup runs under Nigel Clough, but there wasn't really an awful lot to sort of be involved with, and the style of football didn't really ignite either. And so consequently, when things didn't go well, the supporters, and as I say, and I'm a football fan myself, and you got every right, I think, to make your feelings known. I don't buy into this sort of idea that, you can pay now at some grounds over £40 to get a ticket, and then you've got to sit there like, mute and be some sort of performing seal, just clapping your hands, when people tell you to. No, it doesn't work like that. But if you'd have said to me during those seasons that I would see a Sheffield United crowd applaud their team off the pitch after a defeat, I would have laughed. But that's happened, I think, 2-3 times during this run, and it's because they've just seen a team. Do you know what? If I can put it like this, rather than they've seen a team that's had a go, that's run itself into the ground, that's stuck together, I think what they see out there at the moment, the fans, is that, all of us, even those of us your age, my age now, dare I say it, there's times when we sort of sit there in the stands and think, oh, God, I wish I was out there. I want it to be like if I was doing this. And what better thing, to dream about than playing for the club that you grew up supporting. And the one thing I think Sheffield United fans see in this team is they look at the players and think, do you know what? That's what I'd be like if I was out there. And that is the one thing that's really kept them on side, because they're looking at 11, obviously, plus players who are wearing that shirt and, are proud to wear it. But you can see are proud to wear it and are doing all the things that we would do as fans if we got the chance to play for our respective clubs.
And it's funny, that's all we've wanted. And I mean, again, I feel like I'm jumping the gun a bit, and because it's only been 5 games, but it shows how quickly these things can turn, because fans react to things, and we can see Coleman's got a bunch of players there that he knows are going to work their bollocks off. Like, they're going to, I mean, why would you not want to play for Sunderland? I mean, the same with Sheffield United. Sheffield United are a huge football club. Like, Sunderland are huge. Sheffield United are huge. Like, the areas that we're talking about are like working class areas where football is everything.
And you're absolutely right. I mean, the two areas, again, I think the two clubs are quite similar in many ways in terms of sort of characteristics and personality. And the two areas are as well. I mean, you talk about the mining heritage, can't we? And, obviously, had the steel down here in Sheffield. So, and I think the people are actually, they might not sort of agree with this, but I think the people are quite similar as well in terms of, they're not people, you can't pull the wool over their eyes. There's no point in trying to kid them. There's no point in trying to feed them a load of sort of David Brent management spiel, because it's not going to wash. But as you said there, and I think, what you said about it's only 5 weeks, the one thing I will say is that I think you get a sense as a football fan, or you get a sense as a writer if you cover a club regularly or, sort of every week. You do get a sense when things are going well or are going to go well, because, a lot of people look down their noses at football fans, and I know a lot of those will look down their noses at journalists as well. And don't get me wrong, I sort of get why at times. But I think the one thing a lot of people, possibly within football, who aren't journalists, who aren't football supporters, as it were, themselves, I think the one thing they forget is we see an awful lot of football ourselves, and we possibly see as much football as most footballers, most managers, most coaches. And I think because of that, most of us know when something's going well. Most of us know when something isn't going well. Most of us know, can have a pretty good idea of what is wrong with a football club. You see it so often with supporters, you know, where they'll say, the football club's missing this, the football club's missing that. This is what is wrong with my football club. And often I get the impression people sort of sneer at that a little bit. You know, it's, well, you've never played the game before, you've never been a pro. What do you know? Well, probably actually just as much as you, because we've seen as much football as you have. You know, and I don't think you can underestimate that sense of when you know something is going well, when you know something is right. And as you've said, all of the things that you're describing to me about how Sunderland is now are all of the things it was missing when at the start of the season, you know, I went up to the Stadium of Light, because it was you know, it was quite a depressing place to be, wasn't it? There's absolutely no doubt about it. And I can remember seeing some of the players, you know, some of the Sunderland players walk out of the mix zone afterwards when we were, you know, doing the post-match interviews, and you could just see that it was a team that was used to being beaten, and you know, almost just been beaten into the ground by being beaten. So, you know, I think it's great that it sounds as if Chris Coleman's reinvigorated that. But I bet you most of the things that Chris Coleman has done, other than some of the technical tweaks he's probably made on the training ground and some of the work he's done with it sort of improving, you know, aspects of individual players' games, I absolutely bet you, because I know this is the case at Sheffield United, I absolutely bet you most of the things he's done are the things that you as supporters were sat there in the stand saying, this needs to change at my football club.
Yeah, I agree. I feel, it's funny you say about feeling. I keep apologizing, saying I know it's only been 5 weeks, but like you do feel it. Like when Grayson came in, I was trying to fight that feeling, but I knew it wasn't right. I knew it wasn't right because the football was boring. There was no. He sounded like, and I said this in an article during the week. He sounded like he was reading from a cue card. And I am starting to understand what a club like Sunderland needs over my years. And people may laugh at this because I'm just a fan, and every fan thinks they know best. And just kind of relating to what you said before, throughout my years, I can pick 3 managers that have really understood Sunderland, and they've all got very similar characteristics. And that's Peter Reid, that's Roy Keane, and that is Sam Allardyce. And they're all managers who are almost fan-like in the way that they act. Maybe Roy Keane's slightly different because Roy Keane's a winner. But in the way that they value football and they value what it means to the area, they all kind of get it. And I get this with Coleman. And maybe I'm jumping on something way too quick, but Chris Coleman he seems almost like, it's surprising for me because he's a coup. He was a total coup to get Chris Coleman. And I think we have to admit that. We maybe not see that, but we were bottom of the league. 1 win all season when he came in. And then you watch him and he's excited, not because he's like Grayson, a guy who's at a club that's probably too big for him. He's excited because he understands what he can bring. He understands, I think he knows his personality fits his club. And I would love to think that when he was offered that job, it wasn't just a case of he wanted a big job like he said that. I think he knew and he knows that he can reinvigorate it. And I think he knows that his personality fits this club. And I think he knows that if he gets this right, there's not that many better places to be.
Well, I think you're right. And as you said, you know, Sunderland is a great football club. It's one that any manager, you know, should be proud. Any player should be proud to have on their CV. I'll tell you what, I mean, just touching there on something that you said about Simon Grayson, and I think you've hit the nail on the head, because looking in from the outside, and obviously Simon's a manager that is well known on, you know, in this patch, and has worked very well in it before. When he was appointed, I have to admit, I actually thought, you know what, decent appointment there, because I did think that if he gets the time, and this is before I've just listened to you talking there, because something's just dawned on me. I did think if he gets the time, which obviously is a big if, because very few managers get that time, you know, in football in this day and age. And I think it's made even worse now with transfer windows, because obviously they can't come in like a bull in a china shop. Sometimes, you know, and I think this has certainly been true at Sheffield United, and dare I say it, going forward, it may be true at Sunderland as well. Sometimes it's a damn sight easier to sign players than it is actually get rid of players that you don't want, especially when you come down as a big fish into a lower division. Sheffield United had that when they went into League One. I think Sunderland have possibly had some of that when they came out of the Premier League and into the Championship. And it's very, very difficult to get rid of players, and it's very expensive. It's possibly almost more expensive to get rid of players at times as it is to sign them, because with the wages that they'll be on, you know, obviously it goes without saying, some of them won't be going in a hurry. They won't, they won't particularly looking to leave. And because of they've been involved in the relegation, very few of them, of course, will get to a club who are going to pay them what they were on the season before.
Yeah.
But I think I think with Simon, I thought if he gets the time, if he gets maybe 3-4 transfer windows, he can work that out. I'd almost forgotten what I was going to say there. Hopefully you didn't pick that up. I'll admit it anyway. But I think it was perhaps just his demeanour. When you mentioned there about personality, I think Simon, I know away from football, he's got a good sense of humour. He's quite sort of bright and he can be quite sort of bubbly. But obviously that doesn't come across in his public demeanour. Isn't like
no,
that.
I don't feel it.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the things that Chris brought to Sheffield United. Obviously, he was immensely proud to take charge of the club that he'd supported since childhood. But he came into the football club, and it was almost like, listen, we're not going to be arrogant about this, but we're Sheffield United. And you can say that in League One. We're Sheffield United Football Club, and we are a big fish in this division. And we are going to respect the opposition. We are going to do our due diligence on them, but we're also going to go out there and play how the hell we want. Thank you very much. And, let them worry about us. And it gave the fans who had been sort of pretty browbeaten over the years a real lift. And I think that's possibly why Simon, it perhaps didn't work with the players and it didn't work with the fans on Weir's side because, I don't think I'm being unfair when I say this. He does come across as quite sort of dour at times, doesn't he, with his dealings with the media.
Yeah, he's not exciting.
No, that's it. And I think, let's be frank, it was a pretty terrible season last season, wasn't it, at the Stadium of Light? It's very rarely a great season when you get relegated.
Yeah, and especially with the way we did with Moyes, and Moyes was dour as it was. He was as dour as they came. And
as a fan, you would, and dare I say it, as a player as well, you want somebody who's going to come in here and just lift the place and give it a good shake, but give it a good shake in the right way and make everybody feel good about themselves again and bring that little bit of sort of swagger back. And that's possibly why. Listen, what do I know? I wasn't there, but that's possibly why Simon, wasn't as good a fit as Chris Coleman is.
And it's funny you say about what Chris Wilder said when he came in. Chris Coleman said almost the exact words. He said in his press conference, he says something along the lines of, never forget, we're Sunderland. And he also said, he got asked about Fulham. They said, oh, what are you looking out for Fulham? It's your ex-club, and stuff like that. And he said, I'm not worried about Fulham. I'm worried about us. I'm worried about what we can do. That's what I'm concerned about. What can we do? What can Sunderland do? And it's very much almost because we as fans used to being a bit of a brunt of the joke, hadn't won in a home game for so long and this and that and the other. And I think Chris Coleman's kind of come in and sort of gone, hang on a minute. Do you realise what football club you're at? Because we've never been a joke of a club. We've always been in, apart from one season, in the whole history of our football club, we've only ever been in the top 2 divisions, and then we went in the 3rd division, or now League One as it's called, once, and came straight out of it. We have a lot of history with the 73 Cup final. We have a lot of players, a lot of games, a lot of moments. We're maybe not Manchester United, but we're certainly not going to be it if you've got anything about yourself. And I think for too long, there's been a lot of players who have decided Sunderland's just a decent stepping stone. It's a place for a wage. And I think Coleman coming in has very much had the similar attitude to what you said Wilder's had. We're Sunderland. Let's start showing people who we are and let's start realising where you're at.
I'll give you another good little example. You're absolutely right. The way Chris was and is. And, obviously, Sheffield is a 2-club city. I know obviously it's slightly different in the northeast, but obviously yourselves in Newcastle are on, if I can mention that word on this podcast, but you're very, very near neighbours.
We are. Yeah.
You are. Yeah. But Sheffield United's run through, or sort of time in League One, actually coincided with Sheffield Wednesday doing pretty well in the Championship. Now, the roles have been reversed, obviously, of late, but, as you can imagine, the Sheffield United fans as well, when they're going into work, they were the butt of the jokes. And other than those 2 great cup runs, as great as they were under Nigel Clough, there wasn't an awful lot that they could throw back, that they could give back to the Sheffield Wednesday fans that they worked with, lived with, married to, whatever. And I think that does it. It grinds you down at times. Chris, in a lot of his interviews, and he mentioned this most pointedly after the derby at Hillsborough earlier this season when Sheffield United, went to Sheffield Wednesday and won 4-2. And won it was a very, very convincing 4-2.
Yeah, I watched that. It was very convincing, actually.
Yeah. And I'm not so sure if he said this in television interviews, but certainly to me, because he obviously knows he's playing to a sort of a local to a regional audience, there were two words that he kept using all the way through his press conference, and that was pub and league. And, he would say, not bad for a team out of the pub league, is it? We've done all right for a team from the pub league. And it was just that little bit of a dig, because that was the one label that the Sheffield Wednesday fans, whenever Sheffield United had a little flurry in League One, where they're only in the pub league, you're only in the pub league. And, he just used things like that because he knows the area and he knows the personality of the football club, just to bring a little swagger back and to bring a smile back to people's faces and just to let, as he would put it, that, that lot on the other side of the city know that, we're back. And we're just not here to make the numbers up. We actually plan on doing something. Whether we do, whether we don't, that remains to be seen. But we are back in this division and we plan on doing something. And you want to feel good about your club, don't you? You want to be proud of it. And I don't think, again, with respect, and I do genuinely mean it with respect. If you follow a club like Crewe, or if you follow a club like Barnet or Hartlepool, you're probably used. And you can probably accept in, dare I say it, 60% of the games that you're involved in, your manager having to be very, very worried about the opposition.
Yeah.
If you're a club like Sunderland, if you're a club like Sheffield United, if you're a club like a few of the other teams in the Championship, you don't want to hear your manager going into games kowtowing to the opposition and saying, God, we got to negate this, we got to negate that. These are proud football clubs, and so I think it's great. And this is why I'm really looking forward to this game actually on Boxing Day. Because it's two proud football clubs, it's two proud sets of fans, and now I think with Chris Coleman coming in, it's two very proud managers as well. Yeah. Two managers who think a lot for different reasons, I think, but think a lot of the football clubs that employ them. And I think the other reason why it's going to be a great game is because I think it's two teams as well, as I said, that will have a go. So that's 0-0, isn't it? That's
Well, that's written all over. We'll both get beat on Saturday, and then we'll get 0-0, and the whole podcast goes to shite. But no, I mean, I was gonna ask you a prediction, but I think from what you said, I think it's a tough game to call. Because despite the fact that we're on a decent run of form, you're on a poor run of form, I think very much so. I think it will be a good game, is my prediction. I know that sounds a bit of a cop out, but based on I think Sheffield United will come out with this run. I think they'll look at a game against us as a winnable game. I think that probably is the way they've gone about their season. Look at every game as winnable, and so you should. And I think Sunderland are starting to do that as well. So I think I fancy us. I fancy us 2-1. I don't know just to kind of cover off. Go on, give me a prediction. What do you think?
You know what? I'm exactly the same as you. I think first off, my prediction would be it's a good game, and I certainly wouldn't have it on my coupon if I was a betting man. I'll say that. No. I don't know who's listening to this, so it's if she is, I'll be in trouble. I'm going to go 2-1 the other way, and that's because I think even though the improvements that Sheffield United, that Sunderland have made under Chris Coleman up there, I think that home advantage will. I mean, it's going to be a great crowd there, slightly bigger than usual because it's the Boxing Day fixture, and I think that will drag Sheffield United through. So I'm going to go 2-1 the other way. But I'll tell you what, it's a game that I'd actually. I mean, I'm obviously fortunate, privileged enough, not to have to pay. But it is a game that if I was a neutral, or a neutral supporter, or wasn't doing the job that I'm doing, I'd actually look at this and think, what, I actually wouldn't mind buying a ticket for that one. Yeah,
I feel the same way. Obviously, I'd have an interest in it one way or another, but I do feel like it's the game that stuck out to me since a couple of weeks ago. I think two teams, you're off form, but you've had a good season. We've had a bad season, but we're starting to hit form. It's an intriguing game. I think the only, as you said before, though, it will probably be 0-0 now. You'll probably get beat off Villa. We'll get beat at home off Birmingham, and everything will be depressing at both sides, and it'll be the worst game of the season. But really lovely having you on, mate. Really genuinely enjoyed the chat. It's good to have some positivity. We've had like a Birmingham fan on like the start of the week, and fair play to him, but God, I do worry for his health. He doesn't sound good, but thanks for coming on, and if you ever need us for anything, you know where we're at.
No, likewise, really enjoyed it. My pleasure.
Perfect. Have a good Christmas, mate. All right.
You as well, pal. You as well. No, really enjoyed it, mate. Honestly, yeah.
But a horrible Boxing Day. So you chap.
Listen, if you're outside the if you're out, I know sometimes I don't know if you're picking your tickets up or whatever, but if you're outside the press entrance at all, or just like, and I'm outside vaping away or whatever, just come up, say hello, or get a message up, or you got me number, drop down, I'll come down, say hello, because really enjoyed it, mate. Yeah.
Why not, mate? Spot on. Fully enjoyed it as well, all right? Hope to see you do well,
Excellent.
apart from obviously the game on the 26th, but thanks for coming on as always, chap. Thank you.
Likewise. Anytime. If you need me again, you got the details, haven't you? So, yeah.
You do. Certainly do, bud. Have a good Christmas, all right? So that's the end of episode 4, I think. I've lost count. But that was a really good chat, really good positive chat, something I really enjoyed. I think that when it comes to Sheffield United, on the flip side, I care about Sunderland. I care about Sunderland mainly. It'll always be about Sunderland. But it's nice to see that a club like Sheffield United, that I know have been through the ringer quite a bit, from an outside perspective, can recover in the way they have, because it means that we can do the same as well. And I feel the green shoots of recovery slightly. I hope we're discussing a win against Birmingham and 2 home wins on the trot. Believe it or not, that would be absolutely nuts. But I hope we are discussing that, and I'm confident in each game we're going into, and it just shows you how quick things can turn around. And it was great to have a chat with James, obviously regarding Sheffield United, to show that the feelings I'm feeling regarding Sunderland and how we're doing are not just things that are there for the sake of being there. I actually feel because you have those feelings in a football club, you know when things are going to work. And from what he told me about Chris Wilder, I see a lot in that in Chris Coleman. And I think moving forward, we're definitely in good hands. And if we're anything like Sheffield United, a club the size of us as well, we're going to come back, I think. We're going to come back roaring. But trust me, after I've said that, we're going to get beat off Birmingham, aren't we? Hopefully not. Thanks for tuning in again, and I hope you've had a really good Christmas and a good New Year.